Hi, this is Pete Lyons with Let's Play Salesforce, and in tonight's Einstein Analytics video, we're going to be doing the final chapter of Winter 20 updates. And in this episode, we're going to be talking all about the new functionality that we have for Einstein Discovery. And to do that, I've brought in my good friend from Salesforce, Bobby Brill. Bobby, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. I'm excited to be able to share all those really cool features we have coming in the Winter 20 release with Einstein Discovery. So first off, let's go into Einstein Discovery, and I'm going to show you how we've made it easier for you to create stories from more places. So first off, we're going to navigate away from the really awesome home page, and I'm going to click this Create button. With the Winter 20 release, you can now create a story directly from the Create button. From here, I can choose a data set. I can choose my goal. This is all functionality that's been there before. So I want to minimize attrition. And I can choose a new story type option. With insights only story option, I can do much faster analysis. I'll get just the what happened from the story, not the why it happened. I won't have a predictive model, but it'll run a lot faster. It'll let me iterate through my story creation process a lot faster. So let's look what an insight only story is going to give us. We have a new automated setup. So rather than having to sift through your hundreds of fields that you might have in a data set in order to choose which 50 you want to choose in the story, let Salesforce automated setup look at all the fields and choose the best fields based on the top correlated factors to your outcome. We'll do an automated setup here so you can see how that works. So now when I click Create Story, we're going to go and Einstein's going to crunch the numbers. Normally this is where I would say, you know what, let's show you a story that's already been created. But I think this is going to go so fast that while I'm explaining to you what's happening, it's actually the story is going to be created. So what is happening is Einstein is looking at all the fields that I have in my data set, and it's calculating, we call it a regression or a correlation to the outcome. And it's looking at things that are correlated highly to that outcome, and it's choosing those as fields to use in into the story. And as you can see, the story is completed. Because I chose an insights-only story, I just get the what happened, which tells me statistically how my data is related to that outcome. So it's telling me overtime explains 6% of the variation, so this has the highest correlating factor to attrition. As I scroll down, you get the standard cards that we've seen before, where it's looking at second order interaction terms as well as first order. And I can go into settings to see kind of what was selected. So as I scroll down, I can see certain ones were not selected, and that's because they didn't have any correlation to the outcome. I may see a couple that have, may not look like they have correlation, but in our calculation, it's somewhat of an estimate. So that's why in this case, I don't see any value here. But it's also going to remove anything that's too highly correlated. So if there's any field in my data set that might explain 100% what that prediction is, it's going to remove that as well. For instance, if I had opportunities and I was looking at win rate of my opportunities, and I had a stage field in, and every time an opportunity was won, that stage had a value of close won. That is an example where 100% of the time I know whether I know an opportunity won just by looking at the stage. Because if it doesn't have close won, then I know it didn't win. So that's an example of something that would be eliminated. I can easily just add a predictive model. So the next time I run the story, I can get a predictive model. I can click Create, and behind the scenes, it's going to run a brand new story and get me a predictive model along with that as well. This one will take a little bit longer because we're doing a lot of number crunching. We are building a predictive model, so it's a little bit more intensive. So I can actually go to one that's already completed. So let's go into this one. All right. So I have a model that's now already completed, and you're seeing our new accountability alert. One of the things you didn't see me do was set my protected field. That was a feature we had in the summer release where you can protect a field from bias. In the winter release, you can now get more information about those accountability alerts. So let's pretend you saw me click gender as the field I wanted to protect from my model. So in this case, gender is not used in the predictive model. That's great. But what about other fields that might be related to gender? So I have some accountability alerts. I've got 2 instances of bias detected. So first thing, and this is from the summer release, nothing's really new here other than the screen. It's also found that marital status and stock option level are highly correlated to gender. So in order to completely remove bias from my data set, from my model, I should also remove marital status and stock option level so I can take these recommendations. But what we've done in the winter release is we're actually looking at that prediction based on the training data set, and we're looking, is there any bias in the data if you would have kept gender? So in this case, it's looking at a disparate impact. So it's saying that female has an adverse ratio of almost 30% as compared to male. So we're favoring males 30% more than females in our model. Although this is an attrition model, so it's probably not a good example of where you would use this, but you can kind of see how this is working. So I can take the recommendations. It's going to load a new setup so I can see stock option and marital status have been removed, and I can always create a new story. But we're not going to do that. We've already seen creating stories. I want to show you some of the cool features. When I go into model, a couple new things we've done here. We have this compare models feature. So this allows me to compare up to 3 models side by side to look at the model metrics. So as I'm making my iterations and I want to see, which model is better, I can compare 3 side by side and take a look at those metrics. So it's going to take a few seconds for Einstein to put all those 3 side by side and show me the screen. I'll show you what that looks like so you can kind of see how to look through this feature. So in this case, I believe I chose 2 stories that had a model. I think one of those other ones didn't have a model, so it's not showing up here, but that's okay. But I can see my R² value. I can see this is these are binary classifications. So the AUC metric is actually the one that I care about most. So I can see AUC for my attrition with bias actually has a higher AUC than this other model. I can see the times that these were done, and I can even see some of the differences in fields that were selected. So it's a little bit, I have to kind of parse through this. We're going to give it a little bit better visualization in a future release. But it now gives me the ability to see, compare my models to see which one I might want to be using.
So speaking of the concept of bias, this has been a big issue, especially in the press in the last few months, this idea of an ethical AI. Could we talk a little bit more about that? Like, for example, we said, well, gender, that's a protected class. You can't make employment decisions based on this. You can't make loan decisions based on this, that sort of thing. Could you talk a little bit more about some of the care and consideration that your team has to spend when you're developing a technology that doesn't understand the concept of bias unless we teach it? Like, for example, if we were trying to use Einstein Discovery to tell us how much we should pay our employees, and we were basing this off of historical data, even if we didn't want to, if we had a policy, that as of 2019, it is, company policy that men and women shall receive equal pay. If the system is trying to determine what that rate of pay should be, and it's based off of historical data that had that bias, that can bleed through into your model. So I guess what I'm looking for is, could you talk a little bit more about what kind of considerations your team has to go through and how you really try to enable us to have this ethical AI?
It's an excellent question. So what we've done, at least in our bias protection feature, is we're looking at fields that are related to those protected fields. So you might know that you should just remove gender from your predictive model, so that should not be used as an input. But it's still going to be biased if there's other fields that have similar correlations to gender. So if I have a marital status field, for instance, and it just happens that most of the women in my company are married and most of the men are not. That's just an example. It's by using the marital status, yes or no, I could just as easily be saying, okay, this is also introducing the same gender bias. So it's important to understand the data. We're a platform, so we don't know what any field means other than, it's got some sort of value in it. And so it's up to the data analyst to say, okay, I've got these things I need to protect. I need to make sure they're in the data set so we can analyze it. And at the same time, we need to protect those in the data set so that we can easily pull out any of those proxy fields.
What if you just randomly had the salutation field including in your model?
Right, exactly. So if I had salutation and I had the gender field, well, we should be able to detect that salutation is related to gender. It's not going to be exactly one for one, but we look at sort of a threshold of a correlation threshold, and we make sure that if the fields look like they're similar, we're going to flag it, and then it's up to you to make the decision if you want to remove it or not. But that's an excellent example. That's probably a better example than what I have here is salutation. So on model metrics, we've given you a newer overview, and we're showing you some of the issues that maybe you want to attempt to fix before you deploy your model. If you have duplicate fields or fields that are sort of telling the same thing, it actually makes a less efficient model. So by removing duplicates, it's a good thing. But you don't have to do it. Just because this shows up as red doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means it's something that you should review and update. So I can look at maybe identifying some fields that are duplicates and I can remove. That way I have a more efficient model. A couple of the things we have here, we got the bias, we talked about that. Recommended buckets is a very interesting feature. This was a summer release feature, but I want to explain this a little bit more because I think it's a little bit, because we say we recommend that you apply the new buckets, that's not necessarily true. And we're going to make some changes to actually take away this recommendation. But as the product stands today, we're recommending you're taking these new buckets. But what we've done here is we're identifying segments of your data. So if you're looking at, let's say, amount field, let's say it's opportunity amount. If you look at the way that we've kind of the recommended buckets, it's actually going to look a lot like the way you probably segment your amounts as small, medium, and large size deals. Some of these other ones, like if you look around, if you ever have temperature data, we're actually going to look at, we're going to see signal that actually looks at segments that sort of go with the seasons, which is pretty cool. So we're actually looking at clusters in the data, and we're putting kind of buckets around those clusters. So that's kind of how the feature works. So here's an example on, like, let's say monthly rate. I'm going to apply this bucket. I'm going to click customize story so we can actually look into what it's actually doing. And I can find the monthly rate column, and I can see what the new buckets look like. So what we've done here is there's actually different signal on this lower end. There's a middle end, and there's an upper end. So I can almost think of this as my low salary employees, my middle salary, and then my high salary. And there's different things happening in the data based on these things. So by accepting this bucket, it's almost the same way of saying, hey, I've created this low, medium, and high for a monthly rate, and it's going to give me some predictions based on that. So I just want to kind of explain what that is. But going back to the model metrics, we've got some data validation, we've got some accountability, and then we have things on the model. So if you ever see like cross-validation tests that don't pass, well, it's not a good model to deploy. Maybe we should be preventing you from deploying that model. That's probably a good idea. But for now, we don't want to take that away from you. So it's an important thing to know that these things kind of here are guiding you towards whether or not you should deploy that model. If I go into the advanced overview, this is actually what used to show up when I went to the overview page, but we kind of hit it in advance because there's a lot of information here. We've improved the text so you can try to understand what these metrics mean. In this case, we did what we call a binary classification. Maximize yes or yes. Minimize yes. But if you anything that's like true false, we're classifying anything above a certain value as yes. Anything below that value would be no. and we're explaining how you can interpret all these things. We have a what's called the confusion matrix. So how well, if we had this model, would we be predicting true, or in this case, yes versus no, or I guess, yeah, false, negative. Sorry, true, positive, true, negative. So how well would we be predicting yes? How well would we be predicting no? How badly would we be predicting no? And how badly would we be predicting yes? And that's really important. Those metrics are really important because one of those is probably going to be more costly to your business. And so that's why in model evaluation, we let you kind of play with that threshold. So you can kind of see as I move this down and up, you can see how on the right-hand side, the confusion matrix changes. And what is that? That is, if we were to apply this model on a data set, how many times would we get yes correctly? How many times would we get no correctly? How many times would we get yes incorrectly? How many times would we get no incorrectly? Now, when you think about attrition, I think the way you got to think about this is how, like, what is the business impact? So if I have an employee that might attrit, well, or that I'm predicting might attrit, well, I might do things like raise their salary, and there's a cost benefit for that because I keep the employee. But what about if I have an employee where the model says, hey, this guy's not going to attrit? Well, I lose that employee. That's actually more costly for me to lose the employee than to maybe give someone a raise that maybe they weren't going to leave anyways. So I would say that getting this false negative is more costly to me. So I can use this cost ratio, and if I look at the information here, if a false negative is more costly, then I want to set a number between 0 and 1. It's false positives that are more costly, I would say 5, and if a false negative is 5 times as costly, I would say 0.2. So you can put this really to your business terms. So I can say maybe a false negative is twice as costly as a false positive. So I'm going to set this cost ratio, I'm going to apply it, and it's going to set my threshold so my false negatives are much lower because that's important. So that's really what you're doing with this page. It might take a little bit of time to understand it, but once you put it into business terms, I think it's got a lot of value here.
So would an example, a good real world example, and I personally don't think this is a great use case for predictive technology, but to compare the impact of a false positive versus a false negative, we could say, well, there's a reason that the fire department responds to every call, even when they think it's a false positive, where a fire alarm goes off, but there is in fact no fire. Well, that's a false positive. The fire department still must show up. So it's true of my old office building. We had some faulty breakers, and the fire alarm went off 2 or 3 times over the course of the summer. And the maintenance guys would call in, and the fire department would say, "Yeah, we know, we hear you, but we still have to show up and do our check." And it's because being wrong in the wrong direction is far more costly than being wrong in the right direction. So this might help to put it into perspective of why we can evaluate these things as different, and why one of them might be kind of kind of a pain in the butt. The fire department had to show up, everybody had to suit up, somebody had to pay for all that time, effort, and equipment and training, but it is a whole lot better if you're wrong the other way around.
That's an excellent way to explain this. So I appreciate that. I'm going to use that in the future because that is absolutely everyone I think can understand that. So thank you for that. All right. So now we have the ability to deploy the model with this threshold. Before the models are threshold agnostic. We're going to give you a number between 0 and 100 anyways. But now you have a way to kind of interpret, is that number a true or false, yes, no. So this threshold goes with the model. So when I deploy the model, there's some additional things here. I'm going to show you. So we're still deploying to an object. And we've got field mapping here. So field mapping, this is same Same as before. Oh, I don't have this field. That's weird. I'm just going to choose a random one because I need this for the next part. Usually you will not be doing to any random field. Just know that. Because the next kind of coolest feature we did in the winter release is no code prediction write back. You no longer have to install a managed package to get your predictions back in Salesforce. You simply create a prediction field from a label. What's going to happen here is I'm going to create a special custom number field that's going to live on the object, just like I create, as if I created a custom field on the object. Called attrition score. And it's a special number field that only Einstein can write to. So it's going to be read-only. Well, in fact, it's not. No one's going to have any field level security to this field until you add it. So as an admin, you're going to have to add the field level security. And then once you add that field level security, you're going to notice that you can only do read-only. And that's because Einstein is the only one that can write to this field. You can only create it if everything is mapped. And I must have missed a field. I'm not going to do any segments. This is the same as before. Set your variables. What are the things that your end users can maybe change to help your customers from attriting? And then we have a terminal state. This is great because we have the ability to now monitor accuracy of our predictions. Now, we also only want to monitor accuracy when we know that the record has hit some sort of terminal state. So if you're talking about employee attrition, you probably only want to look at employees that have been at your company, a certain period of time. So I can map to the attrition field. This is where the actual outcome is going to be. And then I can say, hey, I want to only look at my employees that have been years at the company, let's say at least 2 years. And that way we can look to see if they've been here 2 years. Are we predicting that they're going to attrit, and did they attrit? We'll know how accurate we were. And then I can go ahead and deploy this. I'm not going to deploy it because I have a lot of deployed models and it's getting really messy. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So once I've deployed it, I can go back to Salesforce. I can go to my employees object. I can get my prediction. So this is a lightning card, the standard lightning card. This was a summer release. But what I can do is I can now change instead of showing a number, I can actually show you a label. So I can say, let's say yes, no. So now it's going to convert that number to a text, and that text is going to, and that conversion is based on the threshold that we deployed. So we're saying that no, this employee is not going to attrit. We're going to see cool things like missing fields and out of bounds. This is great because it's identifying whether or not your model might need to be tweaked. It's not working right. So that's actually pretty cool stuff. You can turn that off if you don't want to show your end users that as well. But we are tracking that internally. And then I can go to the new model manager where I can track all of these things. So the brand new model manager is going to list all of your prediction definitions. You're going to kind of see how many predictions you've made. Warnings, this applies to the warnings I just showed you. And I can go to attrition score. Don't have anything here, of course. Let me see one I have. All right, well, this is not the same use case, but you can see we're now analyzing accuracy over time. I happen to only have good data on this one. I can go into I can click into the model and I can see the actual metrics versus the expected metrics. I can see anything that's out of bounds. I can start seeing when it's time to actually refresh this model. And I can always edit the settings. I can go to the story that this was created from. So we have all that lineage back. Lovely. And we have some errors that we're still fixing, but it's early on in the release. And that concludes all the cool features. We did a lot of stuff. It's really cool. Those are just there's probably a lot more that behind the scenes are going on, but those are the highlights. Any other questions, Pete?
Yeah. So another question. So I did definitely like that we can have that terminal point associated with the record, so we know, okay, your life cycle is complete. We can now see if you achieved the predicted outcome or not. But
Right.
to explore that concept further, I'm a business. I've just purchased my discovery licenses. I turn my staff loose on the product. They build out this model. They followed all the instructions. That they tell me that it's flawless. But I haven't been in business as long as I have by just taking people's word for it. I want to see the rubber hit the road. So we decided to
Yep.
kind of go training wheels on it. We test it out for X period of time, and we don't act on its predictions. We just observe its predictions and see if
Yeah.
they're coming to fruition. And then gradually over time, we start to adopt, we start to trust, we start to allow it. We start to take those predictions into consideration when we take action. Now, I can understand that when you're literally asking a machine to help you make an educated decision and to educate you in that decision. What do you think is a reasonable, not necessarily timeline, because I understand that it's going to vary from business to business, but what are some milestones in the process of this, getting to know Einstein and getting to rely on Einstein as something you can trust?
No, that's absolutely true. Like you've got to build the trust. That's super important. And what's really cool about what I showed you is you don't have to turn on the predictions to any of your users. Once I deploy the model and I got that prediction field, it's going to start collecting predictions as records gets updated. So as those records back in Salesforce are updated, we're going to start making those predictions, and we can compare whether the prediction was met was the same. We can look at the accuracy, like how close was the prediction to actual, and we can start tracking that without actually impacting any of your business users. And as a kind of business owner, you can come back to Analytics Studio and actually watch the how well things are doing. So one, you can see how well your team did on building the model. You can see how accurate it is. And then you can start taking the data and saying, let's say that we're predicting a better accuracy with through Einstein. Well, then you can start looking at, okay, if we did take these actions and maybe didn't focus on opportunities that weren't going to win anyways. Well, what's the bottom line? So you can start doing a calculation, like a what if ROI analysis on that, just by looking at the data, because you have, it's Salesforce, you have access to all that data. And now you have information that says, hey, we predicted this was going to close, or we predicted this was going to close, and maybe you didn't focus on it and it didn't close. Things like that, you can start doing that analysis. And there's a lot of tools that allow you to make that analysis. In fact, with Einstein Analytics, you can bring it all in data set. You can actually score the data set, and you can get the actual and the prediction side by side in the data set, not even look at it in Salesforce and do all your side by side or do all your kind of exploration on that. So there's a lot of tools we have to get you kind of looking at the data, and our successful customers have done this sort of slow rollout to trust the model, and then once they trust the model, they're like, let's turn it loose on everybody.
All right. Well, that's all the questions that I have for tonight. Again, thanks for not just for joining us tonight, but for also putting the content together and for leading the team that gave us this Winter 20 release. Really happy to see what we're going to get in subsequent releases as well. It's really amazing to see that this product has really come into its own when I remember when it was first unveiled in 2016, there was a lot of promise for what we were going to get out of it, and it's really nice to see that come to fruition. So again, everyone, that was Bobby Brill, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, tell a friend, and as always, thanks for watching.